Hi, friends, welcome. It is week 5, lecture 3. So that is the last lecture of week 5. Next week will be our final week of learning new material, kind of more so going over material. There's only a couple things that we'll learn next week that'll apply, and then the belt exam is going to really open up and start to come into play. Today we have a fairly simple one. We're going to really start over these next 4 days doing a full stack MERN application. And so though we just have gone through our back end and we know exactly what we're doing there, what I wanted to do is actually start kind of from scratch again, just do it repetitively. So we're going to start our back end. We're going to touch on validation. So when we get to our models, we're going to touch on validation, stop, talk about it. But we are going to just from point A to point B, build out our back end. So that way we have another practice, we have a thing. We are going to just still do movies, unless you guys have another theme that we want to do. If we want to do music, we could do that, like albums. We could do movies. We could do favorite foods. Any ideas, or anything outside of that, any desires on what we can build here? We just need to be able to do some CRUD applications. So creating a movie, updating, deleting, reading a movie. But again, that topic can change. Books. I love that. Let's do books, Brittany. Cool. So let's do that. I don't have anything built because I want to build this from scratch. So let me CD into week 5. Okay. So I'm going to make dir. Let me make this a lot bigger first. And all of this is happening here. We're setting up our MERN. We're now entering into the full stack application. Now, this is technically next week. Next week is really when if you're looking at this, we're kind of jumping into full stack MERN. End of this week, kind of some reading, but we're just going to kind of work a little bit ahead. But we are going to build this out. So I'm going to see this. I only have lecture 1, and that's because for lecture 2, we built off of that. So I'm going to MKCD. That is my custom thing for MKDIR and then seeding into whatever I just created. MKCD, I'm going to say lecture 3. LACTURE, whoops. Okay. Now, this is just lecture 3 is just for my sake, but let's pretend that this is our project, right? This is where we want, this is exam time. We are needing to create, read, update, and delete books. Maybe we'll add an author, kind of whatever. We are going to need to create our project folder. That's going to house our client and our server. So I'm going to MKDIR. We're going to create that. And we're just going to call this book. We'll just call this books. That sounds great. I'm going to CD into books. And now if I type ls, I have nothing available. If we're looking at the platform, it shows a couple of different things. Here it talks about like a get ignore. This is initializing. This material is really big, or this information is really important when you are dealing with Create React app. So if you're not using Vite, this is going to be really important. The reason is because if you don't initialize first, what can then happen is you can have what we call a nested Git file or Git folder, or a nested repo, really. And so we want to make sure we do this. But if you're running Vite, then you should be okay. We'll still do it just in case, but we should still be okay. Or you guys can still do it, but you should be good. What this does is if I were at the books section, this initializes a Git repository. Now, if I still, I'm not going to do it because I'm already within a other, like a nested repository. I'm in, because November 23 is what I actually put to GitHub for you guys. But if I were to say git init, this is initializing a repository. Now, you won't see this because it's a hidden file. If you're on Linux or Mac, you can say ls-a, and this is saying show me all of the hidden files. Do you know what it is, Garrett, or anybody for Windows? I think it would be I think it's still -a. That just shows your hidden files. But you could just also look up like how to show hidden files windows.
Yeah, I think it is still -A for Windows as well.
Yeah. And so what this does is it shows us our hidden files, and we could see if we had a Git, like if I go to, if I say ls, I see all of this, right? But if I say ls-a, I also see that I have this .git file right here. So this is basically saying, hey, I've initialized this repository, it exists. Okay. So that's why that says that on the platform. Cool. So books doesn't have anything in there. So what I need to do is I need to create my server, and I'll go ahead and create my client. We're not going to touch it yet. We're going to focus on the back end, but let's go ahead and set up and create my functionality here. So I'm going to mkdir, and I won't use my tool. I'll make sure that I kind of do what you guys might do. So I'm going to mkdir server, ls, cool, I see server. Then I'm going to npm create vit at latest. I'm gonna call this client. So it's gonna get this. I'm gonna say it's React. Cool. Now if I say ls, I have my client and my server. We're good to go. The other portion of this is if we initialize this and then we were to run npm create React app, because that's when that .git file is created, what it will actually do is it'll look up the chain and where it's at and see, am I currently nested within a Git folder or Git file? And if it is, then it won't create one. So that's part of the package manager. So that's why we just have to do this first. So whenever you do, if you're going to use create React app, that'll kind of protect you from doing that. You guys should all be using Vite. Okay, great. So I have access to my client and my server. Again, we're going to work on client next week. Let's get our server up and running. And this is how I would do it whenever I'm in my exam. I'm going to look and see what are the functionalities, what are the things that I need to create for my API. I'd make sure my backend fully works, and then I'd focus on the front end, because you can kind of get lost in doing the front end components, the styling, and then your backend functionality doesn't work and you can't really pass that way. So I'm going to CD into my server. And I'm going to ask that you guys also help me here. I know Brittany said it last night, but what would I do? First thing I got to do, I CP into my server or CD into my server. What do I want to do here? Yep, I want to npm init-y. This creates my package JSON, right? It creates that file. So if I were to say ls, now I have this package JSON. Then what I want to do is I'm going to create a server.js. The way I do that is by saying touch. That's just creating a server.js file. I want to npm install express and mongoose, because I know that those are the two things that I'm going to do kind of immediately, right? I need access to those. So I'm installing both of those things. And there's one more thing I need to do. I need some folders. Can anybody tell me the name of my folders that I need to create? So I have a config. Yep. Controllers. Yep.
Route.
Models and routes. Yeah, exactly. Great. And remember, if I say mkdir and I just separate as a space, that's okay, and it'll create all that for me, right? So I don't have to say mkdir config, mkdir controllers, mkdir models. I can do it, and it will automatically do that for me. Cool. So I should be good to go. I'm going to CD back into books, my project folder. Johnny asked, can I be used instead of install? Yep, it can. So you can do npm I or npm install. Both of them are working. That should be Windows and Mac. Either one works. Cool. Great. So I'm going to open this up. And remember, if you are on Windows, you can automatically just say code space period, and that's going to open up the folder that I'm currently at and everything that's in it. Or if I were to say code space and then a file, it's just going to open up that specific file, which we've gone over a couple times. Cool. So I'm opening up my code. We're crushing it so far. Great. Get rid of that. I have my entire server. Now, where I would go is I would probably start with my server JS file. I know that I need a few things, so I'm going to say const, and we can even just go off the platform. And this is open universe. So if you are kind of don't know what to do, or for the exam you kind of get stuck and you're like, oh, what was I supposed to do? You're welcome to use any of this. So I'm gonna say const, I'm gonna say express equals require express. That is me importing express. Then I need to instantiate it. So I'm gonna say const app equals express instantiation. So I'm actually running that, right? And then lastly, if I wanted to, again, this is totally up to you. I could say const port. Now, my port that I'm using, because it's a backend, is 8,000. 3,000 is going to be on the other side. So cool. There's a couple more things we need. We need app.listen. That gives my port, and then it just is going to say, console log listening on port. So we've seen that before, right? This is what actually starts that. And then we have a couple other pieces of information that we want to put in here. Can anybody remember? We can preemptively do some of the stuff, or there's really two kind of lines, or we could do it in one line that we want to make sure that we put to make sure that we can handle post requests. Anybody remember what that is? Any ideas? We need to have this express JSON and this URL encoded as true. Those things allow us to send post requests. So I can do it in two different things, but I'm not going to. I can do it in one line. And so that, and now from just a very base way, our backend server JS file is set up. We're going to add some stuff as we continue to build this out. But for right now, this is a-okay. Okay, where would you guys go next? What do you guys think we should build out next? Config. Okay, Brittany, what am I going to do here? I think that's a great idea. I'm going to come here. I'm going to create in my config. I'm going to create a file called mongoose.config.js. Great question, Johnny. Let me see. Oh, it needs to finish with a recall. Needs to finish with that. If I want to do that, okay. So I have my config file. Now, anytime I want to use Mongoose, which we know we want to use Mongoose, and for the config file, like I said, we can always you can really copy and paste this and be okay. But let's just build it out. We're going to say const mongoose equals require mongoose. Now, we want to connect to our database. We're going to have a couple pieces of information that we can do. And there's a few things that we need to do. We can say localhost, or we can say 127.0.0.1. Now I still need this part, regardless of what I do. I still need this 270.17. Let's just go ahead and take this. Or actually, we'll just go ahead and take this. 127.0.0.1 is the same way of saying localhost. Johnny had a question. Question on ending lines with semicolon in JavaScript. Is it required? Is it good practice? Or is it facing away? So great question, Johnny. It will be implied in JavaScript. So if you don't have it, it will it'll still work. Like it'll still say like, okay, great. You know, it's not going to break anything like in Java it will. But what might happen is, and this is kind of where it comes in, is if you know that your code, you want your code to end, but you don't put that there, and maybe there's a next line. I'm trying to think of an example, like I've had this happen to me. I can't remember exactly what I was doing, but I wanted it to end and then go on to the next thing. But because I didn't have a semicolon there, it just continued and kept running as is. And then it kept giving me an error, but I put a semicolon and it was able to distinguish, okay, this is separate than this thing. So that's really where the semicolon can kind of come in handy, but it's good practice. I would absolutely say it's good practice. But it's not something that you're going to really run into all the time, but you can't have an error if you don't have it there. It could just, the computer could read it in a weird way. So I know it's kind of like a weird convoluted answer, but I've had it where it messed up because I didn't have it, but that's literally only happened one time in my life. So totally up to you. Cool. So I'm going to put this here, and this is 127.0.0.1, 270, and then here, this is my database name, right? Now I don't have this in my MongoDB, but I'm going to call this books DB. Cool. Now remember what's going to happen is we're going to, when this file runs, it's going to go check my MongoDB, say, hey, do you have books? If you don't, it's going to create it for me. We saw that yesterday. So in order for me to even read this and run this file, where do I need to go? Somebody remember? Where in my code is this file ran? It's only ran one time. Yeah. Yep. In your server.js, right? We can come up and we say require server. Now, this is something that we have witnessed before. This is a Copilot issue. Remember, it added an extra server, it added an extra layer, and that is not okay. What this does is when it says dot, that means, because we're in our server, that's saying go back one. And so this dot is saying, okay, now go start from here, go up to my server. Within my server, there's a config folder. And within my config folder, there's a mongoose.config file. What was happening, if I do it this way, what this is saying, and this is what was giving us an issue the other day, is this was saying, go up into my server. So it went up into my server, and it's saying, okay, that's what that dot is doing. Then it's saying there is a file or folder called server within your server, which is not true, right? That does not exist. There's only config, controllers, models, node modules, and routes. So that's what gave me an error. So if you are using any sort of Copilot, you can't on the exam, but if you keep getting that error, that's the issue. Okay. Yep, but this is it. And the reason we just do require and we don't do express or creating an app is because we don't need to refer to it again. We just want it, you know, we just want to run it once and then we're good to go. Cool. Great. Are we good with our config folder or config file? Anything you guys want to add? Anything you're thinking? You think it looks good? Would you move on or would you, add something else? Yeah, I would say it looks good, Brittany. Yeah, I'd say it looks very good. What would you guys do next? So we've created our config. Great. We don't need to. Yep, exactly. We can move on. Where would I go next? Models. Yeah, let's do it. So let's go create our model. Now, we're going to kind of go back a little bit. thing, because here's where we're going to talk about validations. So we know that in order for us to first and foremost do this, we need to create a book.model.js, right? So let's go ahead. I don't know why I hate that this does this. So we need to grab the schema and we need to create this. We need to actually create this, right? So if I were to look at this, oops, sorry, Express Mongoose. That's a file. I'm trying to kind of show you guys on the platform as well. We need to bring in Mongoose in the same way that we have. So let's close that out. I first need to create a file that's book.model.js, right? And again, the reason we do this and don't just say book.js is because if we have controllers and if we have all of that, it can get really confusing. The computer can separate it, but it can get really confusing for us. So I'm going to say book.model.js. Cool. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say const mongoose equals require mongoose. Cool. Now we want to build our schema. So we say not mongoose.connect. So we could either see, this is not correct, right? So I make const book schema equals new mongoose schema. Now, what attributes should we add to our book schema? I'm thinking maybe an author, number of pages, genre. Anything else we should add? Title, probably.
Maybe like publish year.
Publish year. Okay. Yeah, I like that. So we're going to have a title. We're going to have a author, which is going to be a, oops, in my object. I don't want this. Okay. I want a author. That's going to be a string. Oh my gosh, sorry. We look here. We've got our schema. We've got the title. I don't know why this is acting very weird. But we are going to create, instead of just doing this, we're actually going to create an object here. That's why I was a little bit confused, because it didn't automatically pick that for me. Cool. Where we're saying what type it is. So here, man, GitHub Copilot is sucking today. Cool. So we're saying it's type string. And then let's go ahead and build these out. First off, we're going to say author is going to be of type string. We said pages of type number. We're going to have a publish year. That's going to be a type number. Type number. And then we said genre, I think was the last one. Is of type string. Cool. Great. Perfect. Cool. So this right now is its own sort of validation in itself, right? To where we are saying, hey, it has a specific type, but we can add in other validations as well. Within Mongoose, there's quite a bit of Mongoose validations. It's quite a different, oops. We look at the documentation. There's quite a few things that we can do. Now, if you guys have ever dealt with like Python or Java, validations were kind of hard. You had some sort of thought process, you had some sort of functionality you had to do. What's really nice is there are what we call built-in validators within each type of data. So if I've got like a number, for example, I can have a min and a max. So if I can say I want all books before 1800, I can do that, right? I can say a minimum. I can put a for strings, I can say it has to match something and have a max length or min length. Really, that is going to be the ones that we deal with, min and max. Or enum is just basically saying it's got to be one of the two, right? It's got to be coffee or tea. You can have other things too, so you can build in functions. All we really want to focus on is it required? And if we have a min or a max, that's all you're really going to need for your exam. So let's go ahead and following this, we see that we can have a type, but then I can say required. Now, what this will do is required is and this is most of your validations, is just an array. And it's got two values here. The first part is that true or false? So in this case, it's true. Second part is our custom Mongoose validation message. And so this is us saying, hey, because I could just put it as true. And this would work just fine. Just saying, hey, this is true. If there's an error, we'll see it on our end in the same way that we have like our rec res. We'd say, yeah, there's a Mongoose error. But if I wanted to actually say what the error is or create what we call a custom Mongoose message, and this will be on the exam as well. This will be maybe a little bit of advanced stuff if you can create a custom message. All you do is after the value, you just put your custom message. So I could say something like min length is 3, so it has to be a minimum of 3 characters. And then I can just say, author must be at least 3 characters long. So I'm going to do that for these guys. Let me say required, title is true, and then maybe it can only, again, 3 is fine. Pages, required is true, pages is required, and then we have to, maybe we'll say 10 pages, because we're saying, it's got to be something more than 10 pages. Publish year, we'll say required, and then let's do 1800, because there are probably some good books before 1900. And then genre, required is true. Now we can set this up in a way that, we can have it required, but then we can also, rely on maybe, I'm thinking on the front end, we have like a drop down instead of a, instead of them typing it in, because then it just prevents, the same genre, but bad spelling, and then kind of could mess up our data. So I'm not going to put a min or a max there, just because we're actually on our front end, we're just going to do a drop down. So they don't really have another option. They don't have another option of what to do, but we will say, yeah, it is required. Cool. Now, this is all you have to do for validations from the backend side. Now, we've already learned how to do it on the front end side, but from the backend side, all you really have to do is you could say min or min length if it's a string, or min or max if it's a number, and then write your actual validation kind of criteria, right? And then if it doesn't meet that, then what is my error message? So this is my custom message. Are there any questions on this? Any questions on validations? Does this make sense? Can you just put a 1 in the chat if this makes sense? Put a 0 if it doesn't. Cool. Are these much easier than what you guys have ever experienced? Yeah, absolutely right. Great question. Front and back end validation should match. Yeah, so they are technically separate, right? So the front end, what our front end validations is, before we even make the request or try to send the data, it's got to pass some information. And then this is really just validations of before we save something in our database, before we quote unquote corrupt our data, it's got to pass this criteria. So in theory, you could have different validations. Like, let's say that you messed up, or you're working with a team member and they messed up and they put the min length for a password is 8, but on the back end, you're saying, no, the password needs to be 12 characters. That could create a lot of confusion for our users, right? Because they're saying, no, I'm passing this 8. Like, what is going on? And nothing's happening. But then on our back end, we're receiving this message. We get this response of like, nope, this is an error. This is not a successful result. there's an error, so it hits our catch, and then we give the error to them. And so that can be confusing. So ideally, yes, you want them to match. They should match. But in theory, can they not match? Yeah, because they are two separate things. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay, so we created our model. Now we're not done yet because we need to have access to this model, right? We need to make sure that with our controller, we can actually call on this model and call the different helper functions with that. So, and then can anybody tell me what this timestamps true is?
Is it for created at and updated at?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely it is. Cool. And then this is one other way to write it. So we can do module.exports.book, and then it's exporting as book in the same way that if we were to come here and show this, where we've got const user equals mongoose.model user schema module exports user. This is just doing it in one line versus 2 lines. So we can export book there. And if we hover over it, we can see all the things that we've done. Cool. Now my models is complete. Cool. Thanks for Garrett. Garrett just posted some cool stuff in there for Mongoose. But all of my models and my validations are complete. So that's awesome. We can get rid of that. So now, what do you guys think my next route should be? My next area, I just said route, not trying to imply that it should be routes, but do you guys think we should go build out our routes, or do you guys think we should go build out our functionality?
Functionality.
Functionality. So we have 1 vote for functionality.
I vote routes.
You vote routes. Okay. So somebody says controllers, somebody says routes. Garrett, where do you lean on this? What do you like to do?
I like to, my personal taste is building out the back end. And if I'm building out my routes, I like to at least build my first or second routes where I know I have my home route and maybe like a create route or something of that nature.
Yeah.
That way I know I can at least create and test with Postman. So when I go to front end, if I have a form, I know my create's gonna work on submission.
Yeah. Yeah. I like both of those. And I think I like Brittany's approach well. Like I would do both at the same time. It depends. Like for me, if I know that I'm doing a create, read, update, and delete, I might just go knock that out. So I would just say like book.routes. But I know that I need to, it's kind of that edge in the sword because I need to bring in my controllers, right? And so I need to create a book.controllers. In order for me to even bring that in. So I can say const book controller equals require controller. Then I want to build out my routes, or we could do it all together. I kind of like doing it all together where maybe we build one and then we build out another. So let's go do that. Let's build out kind of our first kind of find all books, and then we'll build out our route and we'll see. And then from there, we'll go kind of build out initially. So let's go do that. So let's go in the same way that we are kind of following the platform here. We are going to my controller. And so let's say const, go to my controller. I'm gonna say const book equals require models.book.model. Perfect. And then I'm going to do it this way. I don't like to do it transparently. I just don't like to do it the other way. To where you have your, module.exports.get1, module.exports, blah, 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 blah. So let's do our get all books. And I like to comment so that way I'm looking and seeing my functions. So I'm going to say get all. that is incorrect there. We're going to get all of our books. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do book.find. This is why you guys can see that maybe AI is not going to take all over because it has been way off today. Cool. Cool. Right there. I don't think I need one more for the boy. Yep. Cool. So we're getting all my books. It takes in a request response. Now, when we're getting all this request, we're not really dealing with it. We're not really doing anything there, but we still need to take it in. And then we're doing book, which comes from our model, .find. And what that's going to do is it's going to query and get all of my books from my database. Again, we don't have any right now, but for right now, that's kind of all we got. It's just going to be an empty array. Then, so if everything is good to go, we are naming everything we get back as all books. This could be called unicorn if I wanted. I would just need to, if I wanted to respond with JSON, I would need to call this unicorn as well. But we're saying, hey, get all books, and if everything's good to go, I want you to respond with a JSON of all the books. Else, there's an error. I want you to respond with that error. Cool. This is my get all books. So now what I will do is I will go and I will get my controller. And then go, and I've already brought that in. And so I can say module.exports. App. And then I can just start actually doing my route. So I'm going to just say get all books. Oh, let me do that. Sorry. So I'm going to get all books, do my app.get API/books. Go into my book controller. I'm running get all books, which we just created. And we should be good to go there. Now, my last thing I need to do in order to kind of get this up and running is I need to go into my server.js and I need to add that information, all of my routes, to my server.js. I'm gonna say const all, I don't want my all book routes equals require dot routes. And then I'm going to run this. So I'm saying, okay, import from this routes folder, go into my book.routes. I want you to have all that information, require import that. And then I'm saying, okay, for that, I need to pass it my application. So that way in my routes, I could say app.get. And this takes in that application, and then it gives me access to this app.get. Let's save this. Cool. Let's get this up and running. So I'm going to say, I'm going to cd into my server. I'm going to say nodemon server.js. See if we're up and running. We get listening on port 8000, establish a connection to the database. That tells me we're good to go. We're up and running. So I can go to Postman. And actually test my route. I should again just get an empty array. But while we're waiting, are there any questions on what we've done so far? How much sense does this make? Okay, so I'm getting an error so far. Book.find is not a function. So let's go into my code and find my error. So it's in my controller. I said const book equals models.book.model book.find. Saying book.find is not a function. Type error. book.find. I'm wondering if it is, what do I call it here? Book, yeah. Let's try it this way. Maybe it didn't like it in one line. Establish connection to the database. Well, let's go back. Okay. So it did not like my one-lined module.exports.book. We change that to what we know, and it's A-okay. Okay. I wonder what it was.
I think it's interesting, Will, that like you get an error like that pointed towards your controller, but it really came to something wrong in your model. So I think that just goes to show that, especially with JavaScript, some of these errors, you know, they try to give you the most that they can, but sometimes it just a routing thing, right? So it might be pointing directly towards your .find, but that's just saying because you didn't export the file beforehand, you can't have access to it. So it's just just to say all this, to pay attention towards the errors that you're getting and the connection, especially with MERN applications. It's not as black and white as Java or Python if you've been through those stacks.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I probably shouldn't have gone through that as quickly. So let's kind of walk through. My thought process for this is when I see book.find is not a function, right? In my controller, it's saying, hey, this line right here is an error. I know that .find is a function, right? I know that if I actually have a model, because we've already seen this, we've already used it, right? If I have a correct mongoose model, then I know that .find is a helper function and that will work for me. So what that immediately tells me is I know that this is correct. But when it's saying that book.find is not a function, it's saying, hey, book does not have a function called .find. And because I know that this part is correct, I can assume that, okay, well, what I'm calling book is different than what I'm expecting. And I know that, okay, great, book comes from, all it is, whatever's being returned from my model. So let me go into my model. And here I was defining book as model.exports.book equals this. That's what was being exported. And so my thought was, okay, well, maybe that one-liner, the model.exports.book, is creating some sort of issue, and I'm not exporting the correct kind of model. And so that's when I went back to Old Faithful, what we know, and we can see that that, in fact, was the issue. So that's kind of how I thought through that error right there, because I know that .find is correct. So it has to be this portion that breaks it. Cool. Great. Okay, so we know that this works. We can get all books. We're crushing it there. So let's go ahead and create one book. Create a book. So I'm going to say create book. We'll just walk through this real fast. That's my function. Rec and res, as always. Now, this is really important, especially this rec, because when we are sending something to our backend, we're sending this request, we have to pass it some information because we're wanting to create a book, right? So we talked about it yesterday, but that's where this rec.body comes in, because in our information we're sending in our request, there's a key of body, and that has all of our form information. Then we're saying, okay, great. We have a then and a catch. It's just our promise. Everything goes good. It enters here. If there's an error, it enters here, right? We're saying if it goes good, then I want to call this new book. We can call this anything we want. It could be unicorn. It could be cupcake. We just are referring to whatever information's giving us back. We're calling it new book. And then we're just responding with the new book. So that's good to go. I have this functionality. I now need to create the route, or do the route here. That is app.post API/books. Again, these can be the same because the HTTP method is different. I'm still going to my controller file, and I'm running the create book. Cool. So let's make sure this is running. This is running. We're good to go. So I come here and I say post. Remember, I go, and I would very much so encourage pulling up Postman and testing it as you're doing it. The API says books. We go into my body. And then we have a title, we have an author, we've got a title, author, pages. Sorry. We've got publish year and genre. So we have publish year and genre. And as a reminder, when we click on body, we have to change it to raw. And then once we do raw, it's going to start as text. We need to change that to JSON. Cool. Brittany, books was your idea. So give us your favorite book of all time.
Boy, tough choice.
I know, that's a hard one.
Yeah. How about The House in the Cerulean Sea? I can put it in the chat.
Yeah. The house in Cerulean Sea. Okay, tell us what that's about, because I've been looking for a new book.
It's a story that's like a little bit of a fantasy, and it's about this
Okay.
guy who lives in a world where kids can have like these special powers, and he has to go and like check out orphanages with these kids with special powers to make sure they're like safe places.
Oh, cool.
It's really cute.
That is really cute. It's kind of like the nice version of the show The Boys, that kids have all these powers. I don't know if you've seen, or Generation V, I think is what it's called, on Amazon. Very good. But okay, Brittany, who is the author of this book?
TJ Klune?
TJ Klune, like Cloon?
I think it's Klune.
Makes more sense. How many pages? Maybe we'll say, is it a big book or a small book?
Maybe like 400.
Whoa, that's a big book. Publish year, do you know that off the top of your head?
No.
We'll say
Maybe like
2003.
5 years ago or something.
Whoa, super recent, so 2018. And then genre, you said it was fantasy. Cool. So if everything works great, we should send this request. Our server's up and running, making sure. Still up and running, yep, crushing it. We send it, and we get this back, we get a 200 okay, so that tells me, all right, we're good to go. Now, if I were to also go to Compass, or MongoDB Compass, and we have an ID with this as well, which is nice. ID and created and updated up. Now, sometimes, I think it's weird, sometimes they come back differently. So like ID's down here, I don't know what. I've asked around, I don't know why sometimes it just comes back with a different thing. But we go into our books DB, we have this books. And here we have The House in the Cerulean Sea, TJ Klune, 400 pages. Cool. So we are good to go. We know that our create and our read one, or get one, or get all, sorry, are currently working. Because if I can go here and I run this one. Cool, I get this book. Great, let's create another one. Somebody else want to give me their favorite book?
The Alchemist.
Ooh. Paulo P.A. Pablo.
Paulo Coelho.
Okay,
I'll put it in chat.
There's an A, yeah. Coehlo. Okay. It's a smaller book.
Maybe
180.
150, 120. Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Year. I actually just picked that up to read again. I've read it before. But I literally
I've read it a lot.
Yeah.
It was, I'm looking for the publish here,
Let's say 2001.
1993.
Oh, perfect. And then genre, what would you call that?
Maybe fantasy, because it's sort of like a magical story, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, we can call it that. Cool. Let's add it. Great, we're good to go. And then let's add one more maybe. Yeah, that's a great thing. Let's try the validations. So I love that idea. So let's just try to send something blank. Let's see what happens. Or we'll just put the F here. Maybe we'll put 0 and 0. Now, if I run this, I get a validator error. So the request itself is okay, right? I'm still able to send information or my request itself, but I did not save anything because it had a validation error. And this is what it gives me back. It says, hey, message title is required. Sorry, my dog was having a seizure. Title is required, validator error, author is required. So if I were to come here, we would see that I have The Alchemist, but that's it. I don't have, it prevented this from being saved within my database. And if I were to come here, in order to refresh, I hate. They have something called MongoDB Atlas. I would absolutely encourage to do that. Compass is the worst. But if I were to, I'll have to log back out and log back in. But if I do that, oh, here we go. We see that and it prevented that from happening. And so we could do that with even if we were to go to body, body, and maybe this was a test and it still worked, right? So this passed. Now we still get a validator error on just the fields that have the error. So there's no longer a validator error for title, but we still have these errors here. And so let's see, one thing I want to do is I want to console log these. Just so that way you guys could see what the console error would be as well. So that's our validator error. But if I were to try to run this again, okay, we get this, but we could also come here and we still get this error, right? We are able to see publish year must be at least 1800. Book validation failed. Authors required. Pages must be 10 pages long. Year must be at least 1800. So we can get, if you're kind of confused, you can always just, you can always console log those as well. And you can see kind of, this is the response we're getting, right? Remember, because we got into this catch, that meant that there was an issue with this create. This is the response that we are getting. And so we could even pass that on, and we'll see in this next week, we're going to start passing this on to where we can then say, hey, there's an error here, this is the issue, and then we can show it. So cool. Are there any questions on what we've done so far? I mean, it's all sort of similar to what we've already done, but definitely just wanted to, we're going to just kind of start and keep building this. Is there anything I can clarify? Any sort of things that you need here? Any questions? Other than where do you go by The Alchemist? Because it is a great book. Okay. Well, that's all I have for tonight. We're at our time. So next week, what we'll do is we will, at the right page. Next week, what we'll do is we will continue with this. We'll finish up our back end on Tuesday. So we're going to do our read, update, delete. And then what we're going to start doing is saying, okay, now that I have that done, there's a couple things that I need to do in order for it to be able to speak to my front end. So we're going to have to use some cores. There's just like 1 or 2 lines of code we need, and then we can start building out our front end. And so these 2 days will kind of be building out our front end and finishing that up. So we'll finish our back end this day, and then we can kind of build out the front end and the connection part these last 2 days. And then probably this last day, I'll answer any questions on the exam and kind of give you guys some help there if you need. But any other questions you have for me? Anything I can do to help you?
In the lecture for December 6 and 7, what do you mean by lecture auth dash backend?
Yeah, so that's authentication. We're
Oh.
probably not going to do that. We are just going to, because it used to be that we just did it in 2 days. So we did like a full back end. So tonight would have been slammed with our back end. And then on Tuesday would have been slammed with our front end. And then we would have like continued to build on authentication. But that's not required for the exam. And then also I would build in black belt stuff or deployment, which is also no longer required. So we really have 4 days to prep for this exam. So that's why I'm going a little bit slower, making sure we know line by line, everything is good to go. Because we're just going to be, basically it's a 4-parter. We should probably be done on Wednesday. And then Thursday will be, if there's any advanced topics, I want to make sure that you guys know, for the exam. And then if there's any questions, you guys can ask those.
You meant the login and registration? For the...
Yeah, you don't have, there's no login and registration for the exam.
Oh.
Yeah. That's
yeah.
week 7.
Oh, week 7.
Yeah, because, we'll do like, this MERN off, because you have to do web tokens and there's quite a bit of stuff you have to do that we don't require. So for the exam, there is no login and registration. There is no deployment. So it's a lot of stuff, but it's a little bit, there's some nice things you don't have to do that you did in the other languages if you took those. So cool. Any other questions? Those are great questions. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Good luck on continuing this. I'll get this lecture up on the platform soon. And then I will see you guys on Tuesday to continue building this out. Have a great night, everybody.